Guten Tag, guten Nachmittag. Of course, I'm speaking in German right now because Maya is associated with Goethe-Institut for last at least 3 years. She was our Marathi theater expert for our Theater Übersetzungsprojekt, and she had commented the translations of some theater scripts, which were then developed into stage scripts. And Maya also directed and enacted through her Pratyay theater group, the Marathi translation of Bin Lagnacha. Sorry, Bin Lagnacha was the Marathi title, the Unverheirateten by Klaus Palmetshofer. So welcome Maya in a new role.
Thank you.
And we are very happy to have you here. Dr. Sunanda Mahajan, or Professor Sunanda Mahajan will introduce our speaker later, but I have the privilege of introducing Sunanda. Sunanda Mahajan comes from Pune, India, as you know. She completed her master's in German studies at the University of Pune. Then postgraduate diploma in teaching of German and later MLit from Central University of English and Foreign Languages, Hyderabad. She received her PhD from the University of Mumbai for her thesis on comparative women's literature. Sunanda started teaching German language and literature as associate fellow in Hyderabad, 1981, and later she joined the University of Pune in the year 1984 as lecturer. She also taught the advanced diploma course at Ranade Institute, and I was her student. And Sunanda retired as professor of German and as the head of the Department of Foreign Languages in 2019. During her long tenure, she received many fellowships supporting her research stay in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, these German-speaking countries. She was also invited as guest faculty to Göttingen University in 2014 and 2018. Sunanda Mahajan is one of the founder members and editors of a Marathi translation quarterly, Kelyane Bhashantar, that was started in 1999. This journal publishes literary texts translated from different foreign languages into Marathi. Sunanda Mahajan has translated many German literary texts for this quarterly as well as other Marathi journals. She has participated in different translation projects and has, these projects were initiated and organized by the Goethe-Institut and many other institutes, I believe. She's also a co-compiler of a trilingual dictionary, Marathi, Russian, German dictionary, which was an outcome of a major research project. So just to mention a few translation works published by her, which the latest one is Pravasi, Der Reisende. It was, I think, published in 2021. Then David Wagner's Swikrut Leben, that was published by Continental Prakashan, or one of the social translating projects, Thomas Meller, Die Welt im Rücken, that the Marathi translation is Akash Patal. And also there are many more, but she has also edited books, and one very important book they have put together is Kathantar. That is an anthology of translated stories from contemporary literature from different foreign languages. And it was edited by Sunanda and Anagha Bhatt, Sunanda Mahajan and Anagha Bhatt, and it was published by Maharashtra Rajya Sahitya and Sanskruti Mandal, Mumbai, in the year 2018. So now, Sunanda, you will be the moderator, respondent, and over to you. Thank you. Welcome again, both of you.
Thank you, Jayashree, for introducing me. Though many of the members on this platform know me in bits and pieces, today I'm here in little different capacity, as you know. We are going to listen to the second expert's talk on translation today. And I'm glad to introduce to you all Professor Dr. Maya Pandit, today's expert from Kolhapur, Maharashtra. When I say she's from Kolhapur, it is only the half truth, as you know, because she also belonged during her long academic year to Hyderabad. After a long service of 22 years at the Shivaji University, Kolhapur, she joined FLU, that is English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, as Professor of English. And later she also worked as Pro-Vice Chancellor of FLU. From there, she retired in 2018. The areas of her specialization are English language education, feminist studies, translation studies, and Dalit studies. Apart from carrying out academic and administrative responsibilities and research activities, that is her own individual research and guiding the research projects of the students, she engaged herself in different activities, in experimental theater in Marathi, in translating books, and in women's movement. She has published translated books, and that are more than 16, and a few more are getting ready for publication. She has translated mainly from Marathi into English, focusing on the texts written by women. Most of these literary works she selected for translation are seminal works in the Marathi literary world. If you observe the list of the books translated by Maya Pandit, you would find out that there are many plays and autobiographies. She has also translated narrative texts, of course. Today, she is going to talk on her experience of translating plays, as she says, translating performative voices. Another genre that she is going to take for discussion today is autobiography, a genre which we know that is considered as being on the verge of reality and fiction. So let us now hear from Maya Pandit how a linguistic performative act, that is how she calls translation in her synopsis, how this linguistic performative act has many other dimensions that are social, cultural, political, and so on, and how the challenges of translating a text with all its aspects and complexities can be handled. So over to you, Dr. Maya Pandit.
Roman Jakobson classifies translation into three categories: intra-language translation, interlingual translation or translation proper, and intersemiotic translation. Translation proper is basically a linguistic performative act as it transforms the written or spoken text from the cultural frame of one language to the cultural frame of another. Any text is generated in the context of a socio-cultural frame of reference. In fact, all texts have social, cultural, and political context, which is the most significant generative factor in the process of interpretation of its meaning. This process of communication that the speaking voice generates is located in the text as well as in the cultural context. The problem occurs when that cultural frame is completely absent in the target language culture. This is what the translator needs to understand and recreate in the frame of another culture. Since language and literature are dynamic, ideology-infused processes, the speaking voice or voices in the texts also pose ideological challenges for the translator. Texts resonate with many voices. They are, to use Bakhtin's words, heteroglot and polyphonic. Heteroglossia refers to the ideologies inherent in various languages to which we all lay claim as social beings and by which we are constituted as individuals, and polyphony, that is many-voicedness, are the base conditions governing the operation of meaning in any utterance. Now, the speaking voice or voices in an autobiography and a theatre text are uniquely distinctive. An autobiography represents a voice of an individual who's casting his or her own life in a larger perspective for either self-perusal or sharing with others. The point is there is a speaking voice of an individual there. But a theatre text by default, by its very genre, is composed of conversations between individuals out of which some dramatic tension is created. Now, especially if the texts from either genre come from the discourse of alterity in a particular literary cultural tradition, translation becomes a very complicated process. The texts translated by me, which I have chosen here for discussion, were located basically in the discourses of alterity, otherness, and I would like to share the kinds of cultural political challenges they presented me with in my engagement with their voice. All these texts were from Marathi, and they represent the voice of the subaltern, which had been forced to remain dormant in the dominant literary and cultural regimes. They represent the voices of resistance against the tyrannical caste system in Maharashtra. These texts are two autobiographies by two Dalit women, Baby Kamble's We Broke the Prisons and Urmila Pawar's The Weave of My Life, and two Dalit plays, Datta Bhagat's Roots and Escape Routes and Sanjay Pawar's Pass the Buck On Brother, which made a great impact on the Marathi experimental stage. Now, before I go on to discuss the challenge of translating the voices of these texts, I must clarify the term Dalit briefly for people who are not really aware of the cultural context. Dalit is a term used for the excommunicated, exploited communities suppressed by the dominant Brahminical ideology and social order of the Varnashram Dharma and the caste system located within the Varnashram Dharma, which is an ascending order of privileges and descending order of prestige among various castes as social groups. That is, one who is in the uppermost ladder of this step of this ladder, caste ladder, gets the most privileges and the most prestige, whereas the down you go, the privileges and the prestige get reduced. The term Dalit evokes an image of a systematic cultural, social, economic and political quarantine to which specific communities have been subjected for ages in the Indian society. These castes, mainly the Mahar caste, later organized under the dynamic leadership of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, made themselves heard in socio-political and cultural fields. Translating Dalit writing into English is obviously a political act. Firstly, by default, as Dalit literature is a literature born out of revolt. And secondly, because it is to be recreated in a language, English, which has no caste. So one has to create a new set of categories of social inequality in that language. Dalit literature in Marathi sought an intervention on behalf of the subalterns in the power politics of academic, literary and cultural regimes. Now, English is considered a language of prestige. A native Dalit work translated into English, a superior language, immediately finds itself included in the tradition of Indian classics translated into this language of prestige and power. But more than that, it is the policy of, to use Gayatri Spivak's words, let the subaltern speak. It involves alternative perceptions of the society, reinterpretation of history, and creation of new knowledge that changes the map of cultural imagination, not only in the source language, but of the target language as well. The two autobiographies chosen for discussion have demonstrated how boundaries for the Dalit population, and especially women in it, in personal, social and political spheres, had traditionally been marked for inclusion and exclusion. They also brought out the internal processes of labor through which the Dalit woman's body was produced, their selfhood was constructed, and caste identities shaped. Not that sociologists hadn't talked about them earlier, but what these autobiographies brought out where so many processes of actual inclusion and exclusion in their daily existence, experiences of interaction with society, labor processes they were involved in, etc. In short, they offer us a much more nuanced and complex understanding of how Dalit lives are or were constructed through constant hunger, humiliating traditions of carry on, dead animals, and eating flesh of the dead animals. These autobiographies talk about the ritualistic practices born out of ignorance and sustained through superstitions and lack of education. We understand a lot more about Dalit women's daily chores and the terrible gender discrimination they experienced from upper caste as well as Dalit men. And the speaking voice is very important to accentuate this vision. Let us map out the strategies and the voices they use. Baby Kamble. Now she uses a voice that draws attention to the multidimensional sides of inclusion and exclusion. Firstly, the autobiography represents many selves: relational self, gendered self, familial self, mothering self, political self, as it was shaped through the political struggle. She distinguishes these by employing different speaking voices. In the process, the deauthorized, delegitimized subject emerges with a strongly political Dalit identity. Secondly, she breaks the language codes in Marathi to let the suppressed voices and alternative meanings flow out without any hindrance. For instance, the word Vada in Marathi means a spacious and rich abode of a powerful man. But when it is combined with the caste word Mahar in Maharwada, it immediately signifies dirt, filth, pollution, evokes images of their huts on the brink of all that the village discarded. This conflictual process of meaning making is difficult to reproduce in English. English simply doesn't have the semantic structures evoked by these words. Through the amalgamation of different locations and diverse dialectal varieties, the writers talk back to the dominant ideologies of class, caste, religion, and patriarchy. A self-reflexive voice presents the account of the quaint and exotic rituals such as the Rede Jatra, and sometimes that is the Buffalo Jatra, and sometimes of common practices such as mothers bathing their children or women being possessed by the goddess Mariai in a downright fun-filled voice and tone. But then it suddenly takes on a political stance to launch a frontal attack on the Hindu religious ideologies and practices in the form of statements, arguments, and logical conclusions. Kamble's angry outbursts against the Hindu religious orthodoxy link her to Mahatma Phule's sharp polemical dialogues in his work Slavery, which I had translated earlier. Now, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule was the 19th century social reformer and the one who wrote extensively on the issues of the downtrodden. Now, the problem for me was, how does one translate the intertextuality, this polyphony in the translation? Such intertextuality is also a tough challenge for the translator. How could the translation evoke this sense of intertextuality? One has to fall back on footnotes, detailed glossaries, introductions, interviews, so on and so forth, for reaching out his polyphony to the readers who may not be aware of this complexity of the intertextuality. Let me give you an example of the multiple voices that can be heard simultaneously in Kamble. Take, for instance, Kamble's description of the superstitious ritual of the Rede Jatra, that is the buffalo fair, where a he buffalo would be sacrificed before goddess Mariai, a much feared goddess of the Dalits, who required the sacrifice of a he buffalo. She is often known to possess people, especially women. The narration uses a dialect and a variety of voices in it of old people, young and old women, men and women in relations of subordination and superiority, young girls, young men, children. There is a lot of fun and humor in the account. But even while their polyphonic voices are reverberating in our ears, Kamble suddenly switches mid-sentence over to the standard language. So far she has been speaking in the dialect. Now suddenly she switches to the standard language. She crosses over from her identification with her community, stands outside of it, and addressing the high caste Brahmins, begins to comment on the Dalits' pathetic conditions. Then she takes the role of a fighter for justice and equality and launches a frontal attack on the orthodox Brahminical religious authorities. Now, the pronouns change from we, our, us to them and then you and them in the course of narration and argument. This narrative strategy evokes cadences of Jyotirao Phule's polemical language in the 19th century that directly accuses the Brahminical upper castes for their exploitative practices. Look at the force and vigor in the address below. The translation is only a pale shadow of the original, I must say. I quote, "The entire community had sunk deep in a mire of such dreadful superstitions. Generations after generations, our people rotted and perished by following such a superstitious way of life. Yet, we kept believing in your Hindu religion and serving you faithfully. We may be coarse, ignorant, yet you must admit that we have been the most devoted children of Maharashtra, this land of our birth, and it is we who are the true heirs of this great land. You played with our lives. You enjoyed yourselves at our expense. We never rebelled against you, did we? You considered the cow holy. We never insulted her, did we? We obeyed every diktat of your Hindu religion. We followed all your traditions. Why did you single us out for your contempt? Why? We would have even spread out our hands like spittoons for you if you had wanted to spit. Then why did you treat us with so much contempt?" Unquote. The pain, the anger and fury in this voice could be translated somehow into English. But how could one translate the sense of intertextuality with other radical writing in the source language, Marathi? It would be difficult to show this intertextuality even to the native speakers. Because unless, that is the Marathi speakers, readers, because unless their own reading was input rich, how could they follow this connection? Unless they had read all this, even they could not have followed this connection. And therefore, the English translation was sadly unable to evoke this sense of intertextuality for obvious reasons. Baby Kamble's language is simultaneously embedded in the rhythms of folk forms such as folk tales, folk songs, games, rituals, and of course the political discourse of the Dalit movement. Kamble uses the form of the folk tale with tremendous political potential. Here is Kamble's account of the letter a Dalit woman wrote to her faraway husband, describing to him in a coded language the miserable news of what happened in her hut. The hut is actually nothing but I quote, a makeshift shelter that stood on 3 sticks on the sides, with leaves arranged on the top as roof, a makeshift chula or 3 stones. All the wealth of the family lay around this chula. One big clay pot, one big mud bowl to eat from, and a cracked coconut shell with a piece of wood nailed to it to serve as a spoon. Unquote. The woman uses a coded language in her letter to narrate how some dogs attacked her hut and ruined everything in it, including utensils and food. She describes the hut in Marathi as Raj Mahal, that is a royal hall, dogs as Kutte Khanachi Pose. Now, this is a very sardonic reference to an invading Muslim army in the past. Now, Chulha as Ambarnath, which is the name of a Hindu god, and the wooden spoon as Champavati, which is the name of a princess from a folk tale. The language variety used is a Mahar dialect. Kamble then goes on to comment in standard Marathi how the women employ high-flown terms to refer to their own plight of staying in dilapidated huts and use humor as a strategy to hide their pitiable conditions. Translation of these cultural connotations in English was really a tough challenge. I tried to create a parallel bunch of cultural science in the English translation by using terms signifying feudal names and offices. I quote, "The army of Mr. Hound launched an attack. There was a great commotion in the royal hall. Sir Pot fell down, and the squire, Mr. Bowl, was severely injured, and Princess Puneria was taken away." Unquote. If baby Kamble's language shows transition from her identification with the victimized Mahar community to a strong consciousness of a political activist, Urmila Pawar's, the other writer, her language signifies transitions from her nostalgic identification with the women in the community to a strong Dalit feminist consciousness. The smooth linguistic movements from one to another and their occasional fusion forms a challenge to the translator. The autobiography begins with a description of the difficult terrain that Dalit women crossed in their journey to the city, carrying bundles of firewood, grass, and vegetables on their head to sell in the market. The sophisticated literary narrative suddenly changes gear, and the narrative space gets thickly populated with the angry, unsophisticated, and live cadences of the Mahar dialect used by Dalit women of the Konkan region. Look at the difference in the two styles in the following examples, which are but a pale version of the original richness. I quote, "It was an extremely difficult and inconvenient terrain as it lay in the obscure ditch in a far-off corner of the hills. Two high hills stood between the village and the outside world. The steep climbs, with their narrow winding paths full of jutting sharp stones and pebbles, were extremely slippery. One wrong step and one would straight away roll down to one's death somewhere in the bottom of the deep valleys. Then there were two big rivers to cross. These rushed down the hills, looping through thick forests and valleys, their bellies carrying who knows what under the deep waters." Unquote. Now, this smooth narrative flow is interrupted by the Dalit women's conversation, which is full of abuses. I quote, "May his corpse rot? Why did he have to come and stay here in this God-forsaken place? May his face burn in the stove. Was that bastard blind or what? Couldn't he see this bloody land for himself? Didn't the motherfucker see these deadly hills, paths, forests? How I wish somebody had slapped him hard for taking this decision." Unquote. There are so many voices which present a major challenge to the translator because the words and tones do not have equivalence even in standard Marathi, leave alone English. Pawar uses language varieties for diverse language communities such as the Brahmins, Marathas, Bhardis, Kulwadis, apart from the Mahar community, which again do not have any equivalence in English, and the translation in standard language obliterates the diverse rhythms, tones, and cadences in them. Sometimes the language is opaque, and yet the voice lively, as in the magic chants her father used to treat possessed people possessed by ghosts. It defied any attempt to translate, and I had to keep it as it was in Marathi. Now just listen to this. "Bismillah Rahima, Rahim Bajar Bajar Kaya, हनुमंत जाती लंका आ बांध पर बांध, जकिल सकिल किडा बंद, तांब्याचा कोट, नावी की बॉडी, मस्तक रखी, unquote. Now with the jargon, which is kind of argot, used for performing magic, the Muslim words, the opaque onomatopoeic Marathi words, rhythm of chants, the impression of a magic mantra is created. I had no alternative to retaining this linguistic structure and the chanting voice that emerged from it. Pawar describes women speaking or silent in diverse locations. Public spaces like hilly roads, marketplaces, fish markets, Saudi meetings, upper caste women's conferences. Private spaces, home, kitchen, bedrooms, to explore the psychology of shame, degradation, humiliation, and to assert the identity of a Dalit woman on her way to becoming an agency of liberation. Pawar's complex and rich language is characterized by a sophisticated feminist voice that weaves the nostalgia and memory of the city and the village, brings alive cultures of food, the Brahminical pickles, the fish cooked in hot ashes in poor huts, the bombil fish lost in firewood stored outside the hut. There are so many noises, tastes, and smells embedded in all these descriptions. They throw light on the household work of women and their labor in the economy of the village in the Konkan region. She balances the accounts of violence and humiliation with the empowering politically conscious Dalit agency after conversion to Buddhism. The fiery, shrill voice of her uneducated, hard-working mother, Aye in her dialect, demolishes the prestige, stature, and power of the casteist schoolmaster is a classic in women's literature in Marathi. Like Nora's banging door, its echoes reverberate into the corridors of caste power. Quote, Guruji, sir, you are so educated and yet you speak so foolishly. Look, I am a widow. My life is ruined. Yet I sit here under this tree and weave my baskets. Why? Because I want the education for my children so that their future will be better. And you treat my girl like this? How dare you? Now, Aye was speaking in her dialect in a voice loud and ringing. Then she thundered, let me see you lying even a finger on my girl again and I'll show you. Let me see how you can pass this road if you do so. Unquote. The innumerable voices through diverse language varieties of everyday life, conversations, and comments evokes pictures of food, clothes, games, customs, rituals, and represent the slices of a different lived reality that shows from inside how a Dalit body and mind, and more importantly, the Dalit resistance got constructed. Insults, abuses, fight words, and even jokes are culture specific. Can the voice of the standard variety of Indian English used in translation recreate these meanings? They define the limits of translatability, resulting in the gaps in translation which you need to fill up with commentaries, glossaries, interviews of the writer, or long introductions and afterwards. In short, as Appia says, by making it into a thick translation. English has no caste system, and yet, as Gensler argues, the processes of transforming such source texts into English might be considered an attempt to extend, enlarge, and make both languages grow, a process of passing the mode of intention of the original in the translated text. Now, these two autobiographies, with their subtle and explicit use of these distinctive voices, represent the act of talking back to the dominant traditions and Hindu orthodoxy. And the diverse talking selves that emerge from them also cast their struggle into a radical frame. With theatre texts, however, we enter a different world of speaking voices. The distinctiveness of drama as a form lies in the fact that it's located in the discourse of performative arts, which is generally intensely culture-specific and historically determined in the culture-specific polysystem of performative arts. The language of a text, given text, is shaped and embedded in the cultural conventions, canons, and traditions of these arts. The verbal text on the page is only part of the script in the true sense of the term. There is a huge performance hidden a gestic dimension, to use Susan Bassenet's term, that can be realized only in performance. To understand this gestic dimension, one needs to go beyond the confines of the printed lines on a page. To have an ear that hears voices, an eye that sees bodies in diverse gestural dimensions, and a body that performs in consonance with other bodies by integrating all textual and performative levels. A play is basically written for performance in any given culture. Now, translation of a dramatic text is a double act of cultural transformation, that of the literary text and that of the performative text, both at the same time. While translating the theatrical text, one has to have an awareness of multiple signs and codes and voices at several levels of the performative systems. One needs to think about how to bring out different levels of cultural meanings, how to reconstruct the characters through linguistic, stylistic, and performative voices, how to achieve the integration of the linguistic and performative levels, and navigate the dramatic action. It would be difficult to argue that translation of dramatic texts and the performative possibilities should be faithful in this sense. It might be possible to look at theatre translations from different cultural contexts, from textual and political ideological perspectives. Now, when one translates plays into English or into Marathi, it is not the same act. In the first place, when theatre translation becomes a deliberately political act, there are several questions that one gets confronted with, especially with reference to performability of that voice. Right from the choice of plays to the functions performed by these translations, there are a horde of issues that get raised by these translations, which again help us problematize the notions of domestication and foreignization. Let me discuss some of these issues and explain the terms. The most important issue here is that of location in the tradition to which one belongs or makes a space for the translated play and its performability in the receiving culture. This space is more often than not an in-between space. Though we say that Natyam bhinna ruchair janasya bahuda pyekam samaradhanam, that theatre is the only medium of entertainment of many people, it is true only in a limited sense. Spectators also are not the same kind. Maharashtra has rich traditions in the folk culture theatre as well as popular proscenium theatre and experimental theatre. The folk performance traditions such as Gondal, Lalit, Kirtan, Dashavtara, Tamasha, etc. have an audience of people mostly from rural areas and sometimes from working class and lower caste, as in the case of Tamasha. The popular theatre is basically for lower middle class, upper caste people, and the experimental theatre, as the name suggests, is for people belonging to alternative political thinking. Each of these forms has a distinctive character of its own, and especially Tamasha represents resistant voices of the delegitimized other, a countercultural discourse where the voice of the silenced other bursts forth. When one wants to translate a play in Marathi, one has to make a choice about the form of the play, the dialect of the play, the character types, and use adaptation as the strategy. The issues of presence and representation become quite significant here. Against the view of the text as having a fixed set of meanings, which the translation tries to bring out in another language, such translations question the view that the original has a fixed identity that can be aesthetically or scientifically determined. No, it can't be. Here the assumption that the translation is depending upon the original dependent upon the original may be questioned because the original text depends upon the translation. I'm quoting from Benjamin, Walter Benjamin. It is very much reader or spectator oriented. The very identity of the play is constructed and changed each time it gets translated and performed. Now, one may compare the changes in terms of the centers and peripheries or admissions and exclusions in the original text and its translation and highlight the need to shift attention away from identity or sameness to difference, from meaning as a reflection of the real to meaning as a product of the play of differences within a system with no fixed reference points outside it. Here, translation is not a secondary process but a primary one. Instead of being defined merely as an act of transfer in order to grasp something given, translation becomes a place or forum for the practice of crossing over which disseminates and escapes. In other words, instead of fixing the same meaning, translation becomes an act that extends or redraws the boundaries of a given text and opens up new avenues for further differences. The question of which is the source language and which is the language of translation becomes significant for yet another reason. When one translates from English into one's own language, there is a particular type of tradition into which one gets located. But when one translates a play from Marathi into English, where does it go? Where does it belong? There is no systematic tradition of the performance of translated theatre texts in English where plays from diverse languages all over the world make their presence felt. The world of theatre translation operates in an amorphous and dimly lit zone, and one actually gets a feeling of stepping into the dark. Here, one has to foreignize the text because the translator has to cross the boundary of his own culture and she has to remain faithful to the original structure of the play as it is mostly going to remain as a text more for reading than for performance. When I translated contemporary Marathi Dalit plays such as Datta Bhagat's Vata Padvata as Roots and Escape Routes or Sanjay Pawar's Kon Munto Takka Dila as Pass the Buck on Brother into English, the issue was how to reach to a hopefully international audience the Dalit voices talking back to the Marathi caste system as well as to the dominant theatre tradition. These texts had a tremendously subversive potential. There was no way here to transform the text into a familiar situation, say like the white and the black society, or Chinese or Spanish as against the white Americans. Domesticating the text, making it very familiar, very easily digestible to the reader. This was not possible here at all, nor were the texts such which could suit the literary canon of the dominant language selected for translation. The issues could not be made simple, palatable to the reader. Dalit question you have to understand from the beginning, from the origin, if you want to understand the play. The dominant cultural values of English did not play much part in this. It has been argued that translating into English represents a totalitarian regime of English, but here the attempt was to form a link with the resistance voices rather than play to the gallery of popular demand. I do not know whether these plays will be taken out of the closet to be performed, but till that happens, the plays are actually in a limbo, in an in-between space. Both the plays are located deeply into the tradition of Dalit struggle. Roots and Escape Routes actually has 3 generations of a family that has been in the Dalit struggle. The play does not merely give us the history of the talking back to the tradition, dominant. It shows how the rhythms, tones, tenor, words of that talking back also have changed. It is a very self-reflexive play as it also throws light on the contradictions in the Dalit movement. movement itself as it progressed through three generations. The young generation scoffs at the older generations. The oldest generation does not like the ways of the white-collar middle-class Dalit generation, and the youngest do not trust the old nor the middle-aged bourgeois generation. All of them use their own kind of language and voice. The middle-aged couple in the play represents an intercaste marriage. A Dalit college teacher Satish and his Brahmin wife Hema. Satish's uncle, who had worked with Dr. Ambedkar himself, represents the oldest generation. He constantly taunts Hema because she is a Brahmin. For instance, he criticizes her Brahmin forms of address or responding like yes or what against his Dalit forms of responding as G. Then there are ways of greeting used by the upper caste such as Namaskar as against the Dalit way of greeting Jai Bhim. And further, the huge gap between the upper caste and the lower caste is expressed through the language of the upper castes. For instance, Joshi Guruji's nasty taunt, and I quote, "You wouldn't give us any place in your 33%, would you?" unquote, expresses the resentment of the upper castes against the lower caste because there is the policy of reservation for the Dalits in job market, government jobs. The play is full of such linguistic outbursts where the caste politics speaks out. Unfortunately for the readers of the translation, if they are unaware of the caste system and the havoc it has played in the Indian society with the lives of people, how does one reach to the non-Marathi readers this perlocutionary force behind the speaking voice? Is it not possible for the translator to give footnotes? It's not possible for the translator to give footnotes every time because they are very distracting, disturbing also. They break the continuity of listening or reading. So remaining close to the source language in translation is probably a possible answer. The other acute problem here also was the self-reflexivity of the Dalit movement. There are three generations of the Dalit activists keep on criticizing each other. They often differ on the matters of codes of honor and principles like truth. Old man Kaka wants Satish, his professor nephew, to obtain a false experience certificate for Shevanta, a poor helpless Dalit woman, so that she can get admission to the D.Ed course and get a job. Satish is not willing to do this unlawful act. Arjun goes one step further when he distributes the houses built for the food affected among the poor Dalit families. He argues they are also flood affected, so why not? Now, when questioned about this illegal act, he answers vehemently that the upper caste contractor was also planning to include names of his own relatives among the beneficiaries. So what about that? Now, Satish is a firm believer in law and fights both Kaka and Arjun against the illegal action. Arjun's absolutely fiery dialogue, and I'll quote, "And these are the people who brand me as casteist. People in Bhimnagar have been living in hutments that leak. I don't have monopoly rights to think on behalf of everybody. I won't think for the others. I will think only of my caste," unquote. I've not been able to bring even half of that fervor and spirit in my translation. Similarly, I felt that my translation could not adequately express the casteist venom in Dasrao Guruji's Brahminical language. Quote, "Can all the Mahars be Ambedkarites just because they receive an education? Receive as much as education as you want. You will never lose your habits. You will never be civilized," unquote. I'll give another instance of the angst in Kaka's language which expresses that historical sense of pride, fulfillment and achievement of the older generation. And I quote, "Hunger. As if you alone are hungry. Even cats and dogs have hunger. Even prostitutes sell their bodies because of it. Even a pig has it. You ass. Didn't we have it? Baba Sahib said, don't drag dead cattle. We gave it up. What did we eat once? Meat of dead cattle, didn't we? We gave it up. The whole town boycotted us. We could get no work, no wages. No one even allowed us to stand at their door. Meat, they refused us. Their leftovers, they refused us. As if that wasn't enough, they attacked us with sticks. But we never gave in. We hid in the hills, amongst the rocks. With our children, we wandered in exile, without any food, survived on tarota leaves, on crabs caught in dirty ponds, on grains we sifted from dirty soil, at times on ears of corn that we stole. And if we got nothing, plain water quenched the pangs of hunger that gnawed our insides. And you talk to me about hunger? Ha! Now, the speech, unquote. This speech is not addressed just to the two men Satish and Arjun. It is talking back to the entire caste orthodoxy, settles the scores right by telling higher caste people how they harass the Dalits, and is a strict admonition to the later generations of the Dalit activists not to give in to temptations. Since English has no caste, I decided to keep the rhythm of the speech as close to the Marathi original as possible, just to give the flavor of the original. Another play which comes from a similar context of Dalit literature was Kon Manto Takka Dila, which I had translated as Pass the Buck On, Brother. The play is a sort of dark comedy, a travesty of government policies which mock the issue by claiming to help Dalits. The government has adopted a policy in the play whereby each upper caste family has to adopt a Dalit man and keep him in their house to demonstrate that caste biases are gone from society. It has been claimed by some scholars that caste does not exist in urban life but only in rural, which is not true. Pawar's play exposes the sham and hypocrisy of the claim that upper castes have become decaste. He explores the myth that caste has disappeared from the glamorous globalized India. Dry wit and scathing irony are the hallmarks of his theatre idiom, and they are rooted in diverse theatre traditions in Marathi theatre. For instance, he makes free use of the conventions of middle-class drawing room comedy, Lokanatya tradition. Say, for instance, the first scene among the Rakshasas is an example where the mythological story of Kacha Devayani is presented to show how Kacha is cursed as he will be reborn in a Marathi family for not marrying Devayani, and that is why he is Katsrya. Kach, Katsrya. And many structural conventions from the experimental theatre. For lack of time, I am unable to go into the details of how many shades the voice of resistance takes in the play. One of the strategies I used was to use slang words in English for Katsrya's language. In the original play, he speaks a different varieties of Marathi. The standard educated variety, Hindi mixed Marathi used in the slums of Mumbai. His tone can be soft, gentle, garrulous, rude, etc. Look at the challenges of the following translation. And I quote, Katsrya says, my name? Well, it's a funky story. My pop was a drudge, earned by the sweat of his brow. Bloke drank as a fish, twice as much as he earned, and would get completely wasted, you know. My mother was a rag picker. This chappie, my dad, lived someplace in a dark alley, somewhere in the back of beyond. Well, let me tell you all the story of how I made an entry into the world. Totally funny. Mother had gone to pick rags as usual with a swollen big belly. Father came to cull out some money for his booze. Now see the scene. It's evening. Father waiting for mother to bring home the booty. Rags, of course. So he could sell it off and get sozzled. Mother came, but no booty. Father goes bonkers, says to her, give me what you got today. She takes me out from her rags and puts me into his hands. He goes totally berserk, blurts out, you went got him instead. From today, he's Katsraya. Katsraya, born of dirt, that's me name. When Dhivar Mamu put me in school, he linked his own name with mine. Dhivar. Katsraya Dhivar, that's my name. No less than dynamite. Katsraya, the war. No less than dynamite, Mr. Aradhye. That equality officer told my name to some clerk and she wrote it down as Katsraya the war. Unquote. The play is full of people from different social groups. There are hypocritical, stinking rich women who want to build a cave for the Dalit guy in their hall. Middle-class families who want to assert their superior Brahminical status. The people who are uneducated and dwell on the hutments on footpaths. They want to show them down. Sanjay Pawar goes on to play interesting word games, quipping on the individual expressions. And then there is a romantic relationship between Sukanya, the middle-class girl whose family family adopts him, and Katsraya, whose language is sometimes located in romantic poetry. The dialogue between Sudarshan and Katsraya has deep political overtones that represent the voices of the RSS and Dalit radicals. The play has a very polyphonic structure. The voices of other communities become evident and speech acts and ideologies become further stratified as the play proceeds. The verbal layering, weaving one speech act into another and then another, illustrates heteroglossia and polyphony within a single utterance in almost all dramatic situations. Examples of polyphony occur throughout the play, serving both to distinguish the social class and caste of characters as individuals. Use of indirect narration accentuates the sense that there are more characters speaking rather than just one. Translation of this language variety required distinctive dialectal forms, and I am simply not sure I was successful in creating that polyphony in English. However, the point that I am trying to make is that for a performer, a director, or even a translator, Bakhtin's concepts of heteroglossia and polyphony provide a new vocabulary for exploring subtextual levels of characterization and performance. Lara Fuller Parker argues that actors could benefit from understanding the various speech acts and linguistic ideological communities embedded in character speech as a means towards understanding the more traditional analytical elements of character attributes, motives, attitudes, and disposition. I would endorse this statement from the point of view of translators and argue that this proves to be of a great help to translators as well. I could have taken more examples for discussion, however, for lack of time, I have not been able to do so. But thank you very much for lending me a patient ear. If you are translators yourselves, listening to the heteroglossia and polyphony in the original text might be a very enjoyable exercise for you. All the very best in your translational endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maya, for sharing your thoughts and experiences. It was wonderful listening to you and very interesting to hear from you how you look to the whole process of translation and what is it that you should take into consideration when you are translating a play or an autobiographical text. It was certainly very, very inspiring for the and thought-provoking for the translators participating in the Digital Academy here. So thank you very much. Recently, somebody asked me, what is the criteria of selection of the text that you want to translate? And I said, yeah, I must like the text. That is the first important criteria. Yes. And when I was listening to you, I felt that you liked the text so much and you were really in it, so to say. And you also felt the urge of translating them. And that is really, I appreciate it very much. Because as you rightly said that these texts you have selected for the translation, they talk back they ask the questions to the dominant ideologies of class, caste and gender and religion, be it the text of, so they are really very strong texts, be it the text by Urmila Pawar or Baby Kamble or Datta Bhagat or Jayant Pawar. So it must be very, very challenging. You have described it with the examples. Must be very challenging to take them into totally different cultural frame. So actually English is considered nowadays as one of the Indian languages. And many writers also choose the English as the medium of their literary expression. But still English does not have, as you explained, that the expressions of phrases that would be equivalent to the words and phrases that are very caste and class specific in Marathi or in any other Indian language. So, for example, the title of Urmila Pawar's autobiography, Aidan, the title itself is such a caste and class-specific expression, and with the connotation which is actually it is intended that this should be felt when you read the word. I think many readers in Marathi, in Maharashtra also could not understand it when it was published. So it was, and you translated it actually very beautifully as Weave of My Life, but still it does not have that mark of caste and class which is intended.
True.
And actually I remember Shanta Gokhale saying once, she was little disappointed when she went to watch the English version of a Marathi play, Ichha Maji Puri Kara, that is Tempt Me Not. And she said that I felt the songs, there's a problem with the songs because they, I mean, she said, okay, the translation word to word is right, but they are not the songs that are intended actually. True. And she said that she was also a little disappointed with her own translation of Begum Barve, Satish Alekar.
Yes.
So it again the problem was with the songs, and the English play, she said, could not actually express that the whole the role of music in the life of the characters, and also the expressing the whole Sangeet Natak tradition. So it is this culture specific words and phrases, they are very, very challenging, and you have said it in your talk today, that what actually solutions or what actually tricks you made when you were translating. For example, this Adhantar, Jayant Pawar's play, it refers to a historical era in Maharashtra where politically and socially important incidences actually took place.
It actually goes to the Pauranic story.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Vishwamitra and,
Yes. No, I'm talking about Jayant Pawar's Adhantar.
Jayant Pawar's Adhantar only I am saying, because he created Pratisrushti, Vishwamitra.
Yes. Yeah,
Vishwamitra. And the king was kicked out of this Swarga that he had constructed in the Pratiswarga. And then he could not fall down, he could not stay there, so he kept on hanging in between.
Correct.
King.
Yes.
And that is why it's called Adhantar.
That is why Adhantar. And the problems of these nowhere people, and I mean, I just wanted to ask you how you have given the examples, but how this problem of choosing, selecting words and equivalent phrases in English, because you translated mainly from Marathi into English.
Yes.
So how these culture-specific expressions could be, handled? And
this Adhantar was very clear because, these are the nowhere people, because they have nowhere to go. I mean, the generation that he talks about, after the post, Girini Kamgar and that sort of thing, that the big strike that they had, and then the whole thing broke down, right? With the Shiv Sena and Vasantraj Patil, and all that political, cultural, social, economic, and globalized forces working on the. They wanted to acquire the land. They wanted to drive people jobless so that they won't come, striking again and asking for money, etc. So he wanted to demonstrate what kind of a thing happened to their world. I mean, it was all completely destroyed. Either lumpen element was created, or there was a lot of criminalization of the young generation, and of course corruption and huge capitalists who captured all this land. And even today you see what's happening in Mumbai to these lands.
Yeah.
So for me, the only alternative was to show, because there is no such thing as Adhankaran. I said that it's a Puranic story. So where do you create that kind of a story, tell it? Though in the introduction I have mentioned that story, and try to show why I'm calling it the nowhere people, because they have no place. They're hanging in between now, and they will fall and they will die. I mean, they'll just evaporate like that. That is how the generation, what happened to the generation. So generally you try to find some, like the Chinese whispers becoming pass the buck on, brother. That sort of a thing where you don't want to do it, ask somebody else to do it. So you don't want to be decast, but ask somebody else to be decast. That's, so you try to find out solutions, though very often you are not successful. But then I also believe that, like Rajwade said, the great translation theorist in Marathi, this was in 1892 he was writing. And in Bhashantar, the journal that he edited, he said, don't expect very easy to digest things from me as a translator. If you are going to read a translation, you also need to be prepared as a reader of a translation to learn new things. So I won't make everything easy for you. Now, that is not an advice I strictly follow every time, because you want people to read your books, so they have to understand. But even then, you should not make them so easy that, it's just like some kind of a page turner that you can go to and while away your time. It's not like that. Besides, these books all have very strong political content. They have strong political function to play in whatever system they are working, whether it's the cultural, literary, or political discourses that they are functioning in. But they have their own contribution there. And but if you want to know about India, you read the translations. And if you read the translation, you need to understand about the politics. The politics in a very large cultural sense of the term. So it's not easy. So sometimes I am not giving alternatives, easy to digest alternatives to everything. I say, okay, you want to read on Dalit text, Dalit literature, then you also need to be a little prepared to new things you will be exposed to. You need to learn them, unlearn some of the earlier things that you had in your mind. So I think it's a very difficult path of negotiation, and the translations reader also needs to have that path of negotiation.
So they also need to be trained.
They also need to be trained, yes, because why otherwise would you read? I mean, if I don't understand the Greek mythology, how do I understand the Greek plays? I mean, it's so a reader also needs to be prepared. He also needs to learn something. He has to be prepared at least to accept something new and try to understand more.
Yeah. I think there is a question by Indu Gupta. Should I read it out?
Yeah, please, because I'm not seeing it.
Thank you so much for the thought-evoking talk on how to translate the linearity and intertextuality, especially in the context of caste and superstition-rich Indian society. For example, the interesting nuances around the word G. So she just commented. If you want to say.
Thank you very much, Indu. Thank you very much for this. Because, I mean, G is not just a Dalit expression. It's also used in Hyderabad a lot. I mean, for a very long time, I could not get that habit of saying G because it's there in the, though it's not an expression of inferiority at all. It's a very polite way of responding to somebody. But, at the same time, if you say G in Marathi, then you are either from a Maratha family, caste-wise, or you are from a very inferior, low caste family. So people would be very hesitant to use it, because immediately your caste, you get located in some kind of a caste framework.
Yeah.
So now what do you do with G? You can't translate it now. I kept G at G.
Okay. Yes. I think Dr. Ganeshan has to say something.
Oh, I was waiting for him. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that I have to say something. I would like to say.
no. But
Yeah,
yes,
you would
sure.
like to say. Yeah.
Okay.
I would like
So
to hear.
first of all, I want to tell you a small thing on an anecdote on G. Then I want to respond to what Maya said. You see, in the US, when I met some young software guys, Indians, right? North Indians.
Yeah.
One guy came to me and said, "Hey, Ganeshan, I heard that you're a professor of German." I was asking myself, ये गधा न घर का है न घाट का है. Neither he is based on Indian tradition nor is he in American tradition. This is pure imitation. You see, G has also got in some languages, it's a way of respecting people. Like you say Jai Shri Ji, Sunanda Ji, when you don't know the people and particularly when they're elder to you. So I said, okay, I learned a lesson. Of course, I explained to him that what he was doing is not appropriate. So now what I do is, any of these IT fellows who are all 20, 25 years old, I'm only 76 years young. When they ask me, "Aapka naam kya hai?" Then I say, Ganeshan Ji. Problem is solved. To Maya, see, I'm not, you all, many of you know me, I'm not a person who just gives offhand compliments. I always tell the truth. So I want to tell my true response to Maya. Number one, Maya is one of the teachers and scholars who is a personality 100% going by her name. She's a real Pandit. When we used to work, she was one of the excellent colleagues we had, and she was running a project, and I had the opportunity of conducting the administration for some time. So whenever she came with anything, there was nothing which I wanted to say. Whatever she said, I said, please go and do it. Some people got worried. They said, why? I said, because I believe in the Indian philosophy, sab kuch Maya hai. So we did an excellent job. Now, when it comes to translation, I want to well, throw some very idiosyncratic views.
Yeah.
I'm known for that. See, I'm known in the German studies world as the Martin Luther. Number one, I'm worried about certain things. A person who does not have a sound foundation in his own mother tongue and a high kind of proficiency in the other language should not be indulging in translation. It's a very simple thing. Because today, the world has changed. To modify a statement of Shakespeare, even when it comes to foreign languages, the question is always to do B1 or B2. That is the question. Nothing beyond that. So, if I am a Tamil speaking person, I don't speak Tamil, I speak Tamil. Okay, British have left. So, when I speak Tamil, I should know my language very well. I should know my own literary tradition and literature. The same thing applies. When I'm trying to translate something from Tamil into, let's say, German or German into Tamil, my control over the German language should be as near as possible to the native speaker. Because it's a literary work, it's not a technical manual. The second thing I want to throw as an idiosyncratic thought is, what Sunanda said is absolutely right. Not every literary text has to be translated per se. Not every literary text can be translated. See, it's not an easy task. So who chooses the text? Obviously, I would say the translator should also have a say in it and choose the text. See, it's very, very important. Because as she rightly said, first of all, I should like the text. If I don't like the text, I am operating from outside and my translation will be very, very mechanical. Don't have any cultural essence in it. This is very, very important. So the involvement, the personal involvement with the author, with the text we are translating, it's very, very important. And that is why in the Sanskrit tradition, we spoke of a literary critic as a sahridaya, a person who puts himself in the situation of the writer and expresses his opinion about it. That's why you see in the research tradition, what we have is always a comment. It's not the Western tradition of we take a book, somebody writes a book, Maya says something about it, I come and say what all Maya said is not valid, what I'm saying is right. Then Sunanda will come to both of them. I mean, she won't say it verbally, but she will think and say both of them are idiots. I am more intelligent. What I am saying, this is not the Indian tradition. Indian tradition is I will say what I think about the text. Maya will say what she thinks about the text. Sunanda will say what she thinks about the text. So they're all bhashya. It's a commentary, and the reader has several choices to approach the work through one of us. I will be happy if all the translators involved in this project, would keep these things a little in mind. Even if you don't agree with me, that doesn't matter. But these are certain things which every translator should reflect upon. This would be my request to everybody, because otherwise what happens is it becomes a kind of mechanical exercise. And one more thing. I'm always worried when anglicized, Germanized, Frenchized Indians who are not at all good in their mother tongue start translating literary texts. I'm worried about that. And they operate mostly on Western theories. This is very important. When I am putting something into my mother tongue, into my culture, I have to go by the traditions of my language, my literary tradition. After all, when Valmiki was translating Ramayana and Vyas was translating Mahabharata, there was no theory of translation of Benjamin which they quoted. We have to think about this. To understand the German literature, yes, German theories may help us a little. But we cannot transfer all that to us. This is like a South Indian mommy making a tamarind rice and calling it biryani. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just say one explanatory thing, like why I chose these texts, especially the women's texts. One thing, I was working in the women's movement a lot at that time. And then I was offering courses on feminist criticism, feminist, literature, so on and so forth. And Marathi is so rich in that kind of a thing, the Dalit writers, the upper caste writers, etc. All of those, like so many of them actually. And right from Tarabai Shinde and, you have Lakshmibai Tilak and whoever. I wanted to choose certain texts, but what I could choose only was some extracts translated by, some by me, some by somebody else, etc. And I said, this is not right. If somebody wants to offer a text in Marathi feminist writing, then I need to choose something which is some kind of a contribution to the feminist discourse. And then I thought I'll take Baby Kamble first. She's the first Dalit woman writer to write her autobiography. And the second is Urmila. After 30 years, she is writing. So though there is a distance of 30 years, you can see a systematic development of autobiography as a form of literature handled by Dalit. And Dalit women. And students need to learn about this. That is why actually I chose those texts and not something else, because there are other translations available. But then I said, no, Dalit writing has not been translated. Since I had translated Phule earlier, I thought it's better to translate, Baby and later on Urmila. These were texts which I chose. I mean, nobody else asked me to do that. But unless you're very right, unless you like what you read, and unless you have a political position regarding what you read, it's very difficult.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Pandit, and thank you, Sunanda, also for the wonderful session.
Thank you very much. Bye.